how can Delhi's air pollution be fixed? Now, this chart shows that China's air pollution dropped sharply around 2013. It was far worse than India's, as you can see the red line over there. And if you take a look at Beijing, Beijing has improved sharply, whereas Delhi's air pollution has continued pretty much at the same level, around 100 micrograms of PM2.5. So the question now is, how are we going to bring Delhi's curve down also? If you look at this graph, you'll see that it's barely budged in the last 6-7 years. But there is at least one solution on how to bend this line. How to bend this line so that the air quality becomes far cleaner. And I'm joined on this Earth's Chakra podcast by Sarath Guttikunda, who is an air quality scientist and founder of Urban Emissions with over 2 decades of building data-driven solutions for better air quality. He's created a practical tool, a simple Excel slider, which actually lets anyone, communities, policymakers, citizens, model pollution reduction sector by sector. And that's what we're going to look at today. So this shows precisely which interventions work, whether it's stubble burning, whether it's vehicles, whether it's waste burning, a mix of all this. So our major track, Sarath, I think is going to be to see how that blue line actually bends down towards the green. Can you just talk us through what exactly to expect?
So what we'll go through is trying to understand how we can bend this curve, given the knowledge that we already have. So we know that the levels have been consistently at 100 micrograms per meter cube in the last 6 years. Our target is 40 micrograms per meter cube. And if we give ourselves a 15-year window, what do we have to do?
And that's the green line. The 40 micrograms is the green line.
Yeah. So our in India, annual average PM2.5 standard is 40 micrograms per meter cube. So at least we should reach there. Eventually, we want to go even lower. The WHO's guideline is 5 micrograms per meter cube.
So, Sarath, what I'd like to start off with is stubble burning, because that's usually something that dominates the headlines. There's a lot of blame which is put onto the stubble burning in Punjab, Haryana, even Western UP, that it pollutes Delhi a lot. So, can we use this tool to see that if we eliminate stubble burning totally, how much Delhi's pollution will go down by?
Okay. So what you see here is the first screen where we are looking at this flat line, assuming that nothing will change in the next 15 years. And on the left-hand side, we have the source apportionment. So how much of the pollution the Delhi experiences is coming from what sector? Now, we want to target, say, stubble burning. If we manage to eliminate 100% of the contribution coming from stubble burning, and this is happening only in about 3 weeks in the October November period and about 3 weeks in April November period. 100% of this goes away. The line doesn't bend so much; it still remains flat because all this emission intensity is concentrated only in those 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah. But we want more.
So, that basically shows
Yeah.
that if you eliminate stubble burning, Delhi's air pollution will barely improve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll improve, but not the percentage that we want to see.
What about vehicular pollution? Because there's a lot which is said about that. I think there are estimates in Delhi that it accounts for something like a quarter to a third of Delhi's pollution.
Absolutely. So if we target vehicle exhaust emissions, which is a big chunk of our source contributions, so we will see a big bend. So, and this is bend that we are looking at over 15 years. This is if we drop 50% of the current emission intensity in the vehicle exhaust emissions, but even more, that we will bend even more. But optimistically speaking, one could do about 50% of the emission reductions in the vehicle exhaust emissions, not just in the city, but also regionally. And it will have a huge bend in the curve. Yeah.
So I think that's the key point, optimistically. I mean, quite realistically, I don't think we'll be seeing 100% elimination of these sources of pollution. So can you just talk us through your premise of actually creating this tool, the cost of inaction and the window open to us to use this tool to cut down on sources of air pollution? How does it work? How would you like to see this tool being used? And what is the outcome?
It's a great question. So as you can see, there are multiple sectors that are contributing to our problem. So we have transport, dust, cooking, heating, industries, waste. Waste is the open waste burning, stubble burning, and a few non-conventional sources are there. For example, the Diwali sources and all those things. But they are very small. But your regular sources are these: transport, dust, cooking, heating, industries, and open waste burning. Okay. And all of them need to reduce their emissions over time. And if we do that, okay, if we manage to cut emissions from all of these, let's say 50% at least in each of these sectors, and then stubble burning goes 100%, and then even we manage to take care of the open waste burning 100%, in 15 years we can see that line bending and reaching a 40 micrograms per meter cube. So this is the mathematical solution. Now, 50% is also not an orbit number. If you look at the COVID period in April, May, and June, the March, April, May, when lockdowns happened, there were days where the drops were more than 50%. And a lot of restrictions were put in those days. But the lesson that we want to take from here is if any of those reductions that we saw in those days can be made into a policy for each of these sectors, and so we can manage to get at least 50% of drop in these sectors. And over 15 years, and you're giving ourselves a window of 15 years, we can drop these concentrations from 100 micrograms per meter cube today to 40 micrograms per meter cube by 2040.
I think. Isn't this quite a long timeline, quite a long window, about 14, 15 years?
No, I don't think so. For example, if you the Beijing example that you mentioned, a lot of talk about controlling air quality in Beijing started in 2008 for the Olympic Games. The kind of benefits that they saw during those restrictions that were imposed during Olympic Games, they wanted to make it permanent. It took them about 5 years to put those policies in place. So around 2012, 2013, those policies came into effect. And in the next 10 to 15 years, which is from 2013 to now about 2025, those averages dropped. So the Beijing's average was about 80 micrograms per meter cube when they started thinking about this. And now they are looking at 30 micrograms per meter cube. The last 3 years, 2023, 2024, and 2025, their annual average is about 30 micrograms per meter cube. So that's the time window you need to make these policies permanently get into the system. If you take the transport sector, and if you want to introduce say 30,000 buses in the city, it will take tendering, getting drivers, putting all the best practices in place, having a social behavioral change concept into the community. So all that will take time.
In fact, that's what I was also just going to point out that 50% over a 15-year period is actually works out to be fairly small incremental steps on an annual basis. What about starting
Absolutely.
now? Do we need to start right now in 2026? We are in early 26 at the moment, or can this wait for a couple of years for plans, funding to settle down?
No, I think at least the thinking of this has to start now. And as you said, the annual increments will be very, very small. But if you keep those annual increments, let's say we do 2% in 2027, another 2% in 2028, but it's got into a system where we don't have to keep doing two. In the future years, we could be doing like 5%, 10%, and then the line will bend even faster. But if we delay that start, this line will be flatter for more years, as you can see, and our cost to do the same amount of work, it will increase. Now, so we want to go from 100 to 40 in 15 years, and if we want to do that in 10 years, our cost will be more.
So, one thing that you have been talking about is the cost of inaction or the cost of delay. How do you
Yeah.
quantify this? How should policymakers, communities, businesses be quantifying this to understand why we should start now and why we can't wait to start, as your chart at the moment shows, say around 2030?
So a quick mathematical answer for that is looking at the population exposed under this curve. No, and anything above is the avoided burden. So if we start today, our avoided burden, cumulative avoided burden from 2019 is about 21%. But if we keep delaying that, we keep losing those benefits. And those benefits can be documented as preventable premature deaths, preventive care, and we can actually put a value to these all these endpoints, and we have that in the economic cost as well.
In fact, there was, I think, a Dalberg report recently which actually showed that
Mhm.
poor air quality has led to something like a 33% drop, I think they said, in footfall across Delhi's commercial hubs. And that cost the tourism
Yeah.
sector around $135 million annually. Uh,
Yeah.
India's average PM2.5 level of 50.6 micrograms, they estimated has resulted in a loss of something like 6% of the GDP, about 260 billion. So there is a very
Hmm.
quantifiable loss, economic loss because of air pollution. So
Yes.
the other thing that I just wanted to discuss was that is this only for Delhi? Because there are many other uh, polluted cities, areas in India.
Mhm.
How does the system, I mean, what is the underlying data that this system works on?
So this tool can be adapted to any city. So we need basically two pieces of information. One is the annual average concentration trend. It could be it can come from a model product for the city's airshed or from a good monitor network data that we can pull it from. And the second piece of information is a source apportionment study. If the city already has a sample-based source apportionment study, we can use that. Or if we have a model-based source apportionment pie, we can use that as well. So these two pieces of information we need.
And I would imagine that, municipalities and other urban local bodies would be interested in using such tools. So has there been any interest that you've come across or in your interactions with ULBs, with municipalities?
I mean, we've been interacting with a few ULBs, and more importantly, we had a little show and tell of this tool at the CAQM as well in the recent meetings. And like you also said in the beginning, what this tool does, it visualizes the data that we have in front of us, and it also visualizes the path we need to take to reach that target. So if our target is 40, okay, what paths do we need to take? So it doesn't have to be a drastic step down. We can't do anything in 1 year. So give ourselves a window of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But then what paths do we take? So just visualizing that and trying to and understanding how much we have to do, the discussion actually takes a very different path. Now I know I need to cut 50% of emission in the vehicle exhaust contribution. Okay. Now we can have a secondary discussion. So how can I achieve that 50%? Is that all going to come from public transport? Is it all comes from cycling and walking? Is that coming from the freight vehicles that are passing through the city or around the city? Or like what? Maybe I can just change the behavioral or the consumer behavior, travel behavior in the city, and I may have a drop from that as well. So we can explore those opportunities. Yeah.
The CAQM has just come out, in fact, with something like 18 action plans for the 5 states in and around Delhi, and I think
Mhm.
another dozen or so cities. Is there any chance of this kind of tool being used or this particular tool being used by them? Can you shed some
Yeah.
light on that?
So yeah. So that's the second step. So here we managed to do how much we have to do in each of these sectors, and something that we are trying to evaluate as well. So those 18 points that we have are very specific points. They go into a specific sector. So we are trying to kind of inject those parallel systems to this. And then we can pinpoint, okay, if we do more public transportation, what is the benefit? So we can highlight those changes as well.
Any advice for people on how they should be using this tool, Sarath?
So there are two steps to this. This tool, when you go there, it will immediately tell you how much you have to do in each of these sectors. So you can explore that. So once you've decided on that, okay, for example, the transport sector says you have to do 50%. So how can I achieve that 50% drop? So for these, so we have individual tools for individual sectors. So if you go to on our website under tools, you will have a tool for waste management, you have tools for transport sector, and then you have a tool for industry. So you can explore each of these tools individually to see how much we can do and what will be the benefits of that, both in terms of energy, emissions, and even it indicate the CO2 emissions as well.
Now, that is the government, the official level at a very high level. What about seeing this as a solution from an individual point of view? Because we've seen, especially in this season, at least
Yeah.
in the Delhi region, there's been a lot of outrage. How should individuals see it, especially those who have been very concerned about it and want some answers and want some, want some action?
Yeah, so this is the behavioral change aspect of the whole air quality management. Okay, so if we look at okay how much work that is to come from top down, again let's take an example of waste burning. So the waste burning, the waste management sector falls under the municipality. So the municipality's top down responsibility is having the system in place to pick up the garbage and manage the garbage. So that the bottom up part is the waste generation, which is the individual's responsibility. Okay. So if I have to cut down 50% of my waste contribution in the pie, okay, how much of that is the responsibility of a consumer and in the waste generation? How much can I reduce the waste generation? And then on the top down side will be municipal responsibility of if the waste is being generated, how much they can actually like manage and make sure that it doesn't get left behind on the road for burning. So we could break the same tools into responsibilities pie as well.
So as I understand it, this tool is ready to use for Delhi. It needs
Yeah,
some underlying data, source apportionment, emissions inventory to be able to be used by officials in other cities. But
yeah,
individuals can start playing around with the tool to understand if this
absolutely.
changes, if I use vehicles, if all of us together use fewer
Yeah,
vehicles, this is the impact it will have. If the industries have, I don't know, pollution filters or whatever it might be, if it eliminates stubble burning, that's how much lower the air pollution is going to keep going down by.
yeah,
Now, if we had enough political currency to move maybe just one or two sliders in a big way, not just the incremental 2 to 5%, but say 10%, 20%, take
yeah.
big strides because this is been now quite a big problem for a long time. So there is some impatience. If there was one thing that this tool tells us to do and there was political currency, political capital to actually do this, what would you pick for Delhi?
Then I'll pick two things. One a top-down solution and one is a bottom-up solution. A top-down solution would be looking at the waste management. The city takes care of the waste 100%, and then that's a big change that will come. And a bottom-up solution would be walking and cycling. You know, if more portion of transport-centric not consumers, commuters, if they move to walking and cycling, especially for the short trips, no, that will be a big change coming in from the yeah,
But for that, I would imagine, I think a lot of people are compelled to do that anyway, because given I think there was a report recently, a couple of years ago from the CAQM, which said 7 out of 10 people do not have the luxury of using their own private
mhm,
transportation. Right.
yeah,
There is
yeah,
also the factor of air pollution, paradoxically, but also pavements are not made. It's very hot. The weather
Yeah,
is not very favorable for that. So I guess those problems also have to be solved. The first mile connectivity, the last mile connectivity, as you may see it.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
if I may just move on to one more thing, that you've been doing this for decades now. You're almost like a one-man
Mhm.
army who's been tackling air pollution or figuring out the solutions, delving into the data. How would you rate the progress, at least in the last decade, decade and a half, in terms of air pollution? You use whatever scale, whatever yardstick, however you would like to describe this.
I'll say we are mid-level. So in the last 6 years, the concentrations have remained at 100 micrograms per meter cube. Means that there's something is happening in the city that is keeping those numbers at 100. They're not going up. Because if you look at the fuel consumption in the city, it is going up. Petrol, diesel, gas, general population numbers have been going up. So the energy consumption trend has been up, but somehow the numbers have kept steady at 100. So that's a positive sign. Okay, and anything, even the waste and the transport, everything, something has happened that kept the numbers low. So that's a positive sign. That's why I want to give it a mid rating. So we're not, at least we're not going up.
That's a good way of looking at it, that it's not going up. And I guess the measures that the government has taken, like leapfrogging from BS4 to
Yeah,
BS6, has helped.
yeah, yeah. And more pipe gas has gone into the city. There has been more awareness on the waste management, and and more there's more EVs coming into the system. So all those things are helping us just maintain that number. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I think in the new action plans that have been released, at least for Delhi, the goal is to reduce it by another 15% this year over an average
yeah.
of the last 5 years. I'm not sure whether that is reasonable or whether that's realistic, but it's a good target to set. What, any views on that?
I think it's a good target to set, but I think realistically speaking, I think 15% in 1 year is a bit too much. Suddenly, we want that to happen. It won't be possible. I mean, because we don't have a sector in place in that pie which will give us 15% drop in 1 year, and then our infrastructure-wise, we're not ready to absorb that kind of change.
So, do you see that? I mean, given that we've been coasting along at about 100 micrograms for the last 5, 6 years, and I take your point that at least it hasn't become worse, but it's not getting
Mhm.
better. Do
Yeah.
you think that Delhi's air pollution problem is fixable, or have we reached crossed a point of no return?
No, it's definitely fixable. I think that's what the lessons that we have from the history, right? So if you look at Beijing, I think the same conversation happened for Beijing in 2005, 6, 7 before the Olympics. Like, no, okay, how can we have these games here in such a bad air quality and environment? But they fixed it and they reversed the entire trend going forward in the future years. Then the same thing in Paris, in London, in LA. Like all of them have a slightly different form of the problem, but it's their quality at the end of the day. And then they fixed it. What we really need is a couple of things. One is the political will to bend that curve, and then two, to have all the interventions in place and have the patience to implement all of them over the next now 5 to 10, 15 years, so that at least at the end of 10 years, 15 years, we start reaping those benefits.
Yeah, can't agree with you more. I think we do need political will to bend the pollution curve. Just one question which often comes up, especially when we make comparisons. It's always hard to make comparisons because of different realities. But is it fair to compare cities like Beijing and Paris with Delhi, or are there lessons to be learned? How do you view this, the comparison problem?
Uh, geography wise, they're comparable. They're all big cities. Population density wise, urban density wise, they're all comparable. And even economics wise, they're not so different. I mean, it's also it's a big economy centric place. So in that sense, they're all comparable. So if we think that they have bent the curve, then we should be able to take the same lessons and we should be able to bend the curve as well. So in that sense, fully comparable. It's just that we're not doing enough in the same level. Like Paris, for example, now they operate close to 1,000 kilometers of safe biking network. If in 2024 Olympics, that was the most cycled event. Okay, everybody could go from one wing to the other using cycles. It was the most non-motorized transport-centric event that happened. Hmm? We need to get that. So I think we barely have about 50 safe, 50 kilometers of safe cycling network. We need that 1,000 at least. Same thing happened in Beijing as well, right? So they have about 30,000 EV buses, huge network of cycling pathways. Yeah. So it makes a huge difference in having that infrastructure.
Just as an aside, there would be people who'd say, cycling in 35, 40, 45 degrees of Delhi heat is
Yeah.
not the same thing. You can't compare that. So, uh, are there solutions around that? Are there workarounds?
I think that safe cycling pathways is part of that. I mean, in that sense, that one could say that in Copenhagen it's so cold and people shouldn't be cycling, but there, the 70% of the people cycle for work, and they're working year round. Uh, I think if the infrastructure is in place, people will find a way. And we're not expecting people to cycle like 10 kilometers. We're looking at like short trips, last mile trip, now half a kilometer, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, and then you use the other form of other modes of transport. Yeah.
Finally, what I'd like to discuss is the aspect of funding. We've spoken about political will, and I think maybe
Yeah.
there is political will which is building up that we do need to resolve this because there's a lot
Yeah.
hanging on it, optics, investment, etc., and of course health.
Yeah.
The measures or the pollution sources that need to be tackled are plenty.
Yeah.
Do you think we have enough funding for it, or is lack of funds a major hurdle?
Money is a hurdle at any given point. I'm not an economist. I don't know how to.
But I mean, in the small incremental ways that you have suggested, that you don't have to bite a big chunk off, but let's start taking small steps and then work our way up.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I mean, the solar mission has been very effective. I mean, right now, like 50% of the installed electricity generation capacity is renewable energies, and a good chunk of that was subsidies, both given to individuals and also to companies in inputting that happen. So that's a good example. And like public transportation system can also be a public-private partnership program. It can expand on its own. Even in Delhi, also a lot of bus operators were private for a long time. The DTC taken over afterwards, but it can work in a very large network as well. Yeah. But I would like to believe that if somebody puts a foot down saying that okay, I want 1,000 kilometers of cycling pathways in the city, I think money will come.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing that you also pointed out that there are already a lot of successful solutions which have been worked out, not
Yes.
necessarily for air pollution, like the solar machine you pointed out, the leapfrogging from
Yeah.
BS4 to BS6. We are seeing
Yeah.
the results today, the positive results today. The Ujjwala scheme, which is fantastic. You've written extensively about that. The
Yeah.
DMRC, the Delhi Metro, which is really quite a good
Yeah.
metro network. So
Yeah.
I think when the government puts its mind to it, there are solutions which are
Yeah.
possible and they can be delivered at scale and relatively quickly. So maybe we hope for the best for the next 10 to 15 years and see cleaner air. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
Sarath, thanks very much for joining us. And I do want to tell everyone that in case you want to try this out, the link to the tool will be in the description below.
Yeah.
Any questions for Sarath or me, please feel free to comment in the link below and we'll get back to you. I'm roping Sarath in for this also. Thanks very
Thank
much,
you.
Sarath.
Thank you, Chetan.